The silence in the communications bay of the Galactic Council Monitoring Station Epsilon 7 was broken only by the steady hum of quantum processors filtering through millions of transmissions across known space. Communications officer Zephy's four eyes tracked the scrolling data streams with practiced efficiency, her chitinous fingers dancing across holographic controls as she sorted through routine merchant chatter, scientific reports, and the occasional diplomatic exchange. The Valkyrie had been performing this duty for 3 standard cycles, ever since the Council had established the Deep Space Monitoring Network to keep watch for potential threats from the Outer Rim territories. It was mostly tedious work, monitoring the civilized sectors for signs of piracy or territorial disputes that might require Council intervention. The truly dangerous regions beyond the galactic edge remained largely silent, populated only by rumors and the occasional explorer who never returned. When the signal first appeared on her console, Zephy almost dismissed it as background radiation. The transmission was weak, distorted by the vast distances of interstellar space and corrupted by what appeared to be interference from multiple stellar phenomena. But something about the mathematical precision of certain elements caught her attention. This wasn't random cosmic noise. She isolated the signal and began running it through the station's most sophisticated decryption algorithms. What emerged made her secondary heart skip several beats. It was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and coming from a region of space that the Council's star charts marked as unexplored wilderness. More disturbing still, the transmission followed none of the established protocols used by any of the 43 known sapient species in the galactic community. Senior Analyst Morden, she called across the bay, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of her species. I need you to verify something. The elderly Threnodite shuffled over on his 6 legs, his crystalline carapace catching the light from the monitoring displays. Morden had been analyzing xenobiological communications for longer than most species had possessed interstellar flight, and his expertise was legendary throughout the Council's scientific divisions. What have you found, young Zephy? He asked, settling his bulk next to her workstation. An unknown transmission from Sector 847 Gamma. It's structured, definitely artificial, but it doesn't match any linguistic patterns in our databases. The encoding is completely foreign. Morden's compound eyes studied the waveform patterns dancing across the display. After several minutes of analysis, he made a sound that might have been concern or curiosity in his species' complex vocal range. Increase the processing power. Route this through the Xenolinguistic Analysis Center on Thalmos Prime. And flag it for immediate review by the Security Council. Sir, is it really that significant? It could just be a previously unknown civilization making first contact. Look at these power signatures, Zephy. Look at the transmission strength required to broadcast this signal across such vast distances. Whatever sent this message has technology that rivals or exceeds our own most advanced systems. And notice the underlying carrier wave structure. This isn't a greeting or a scientific exchange. The mathematical models suggest distress patterns, urgency, perhaps even desperation. As the hours passed and the xenolinguistic computers worked to decode the message, more details began to emerge. The transmission originated from a star system approximately 12,000 light-years beyond the furthest Council outpost, in a region where long-range surveys had detected unusual gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic disturbances. More concerning was the growing realization that this wasn't just one signal, but part of a coordinated series of transmissions spanning multiple star systems across what appeared to be an entire galactic arm. The breakthrough came when the artificial intelligence systems at Thalmos Prime identified recurring mathematical constants buried within the signal's structure. These weren't random numbers but specific values related to atomic weights, quantum mechanics, and universal physical laws. Someone was deliberately embedding scientific data to establish a baseline for translation. Council member Vexhi Morden spoke into his communication device as the decoded message began to appear on their screens. You need to see this immediately. The Council's emergency session was called within hours. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, their various forms and biologies creating a mosaic of galactic civilization. At the center of the assembly, the decoded message played on massive holographic displays. The translation, while still imperfect, was chilling in its implications. It spoke of systems under siege, of entire worlds being consumed by entities described only as the Devourers from beyond. The messages detailed weapons that could crack planets and ships that moved faster than should be physically possible. Most disturbing of all, they spoke of the systematic destruction of what appeared to be an advanced spacefaring civilization. The mathematical models are unprecedented, reported Chief Science Advisor Telran, his tentacle form writhing with agitation. Based on the energy signatures we're detecting, these devourers are operating with technology that appears to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Faster-than-light travel without quantum tunneling, energy manipulation that suggests matter conversion at previously impossible efficiency rates. What of the civilization sending these distress calls? Asked Council Leader Prime Korthak, his massive form dominating the central dais.
What do we know of them? Very little, Honored Prime.
They refer to themselves through a designation that roughly translates to descendants of the third world from a yellow star. Their technological signatures suggest they've achieved faster-than-light travel relatively recently, perhaps within the last few centuries of their development. What's remarkable is that despite being apparently less advanced than the entities attacking them, they appear to be mounting some form of resistance. The debate that followed would later be remembered as one of the most significant in Council history. Some representatives argued for immediate investigation, dispatching long-range scout vessels to assess the situation. Others counseled caution, pointing out that whatever forces were capable of threatening an entire civilization might pose an existential threat to the Council itself.
We cannot ignore this, declared Ambassador Ethnera of the Hegemony Worlds, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with emphasis. If these devourers are capable of consuming entire star systems, how long before they turn their attention toward our territories? And, what would you have us do? Countered Representative Yultai from the Merchant Coalition. Send our fleets to die against enemies that can apparently bend the laws of physics?
We know nothing about these entities, nothing about the civilization they're attacking, and nothing about the true nature of this conflict. As the arguments continued, new transmissions continued to arrive at monitoring stations across the galaxy. The signals were becoming weaker, more sporadic, and increasingly desperate in tone. Entire star systems that had been broadcasting distress calls suddenly went silent. The unknown civilization was losing, and losing badly. It was during the third day of debate that everything changed. Communications Officer Zeftai was monitoring the latest transmissions when her console exploded with activity. Not one signal, but hundreds, all originating from the same general region of space but spread across dozens of star systems. The power signatures were unlike anything previously recorded, suggesting transmission arrays that spanned entire planets. Senior Analyst Mordin, she called, her voice cracking with stress.
Something's happening.
The signal patterns have completely changed. Mordin rushed to her station, followed by several other senior staff members. What they saw on the displays defied immediate explanation.
The new transmissions weren't distress calls.
They were something else entirely, broadcasted on frequencies that should have been impossible to generate without tapping into the energy output of entire stars.
The mathematical structure was different too.
Where the previous messages had been desperate pleas for help, these new signals carried an undertone of grim determination. The xenolinguistic computers worked frantically to process the new data, but, even before complete translation, certain elements were becoming clear.
They're not calling for help anymore, Mordin said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They're sending out warnings. And I think they're also sending out coordinates. Coordinates for what?
For something they're calling the Fleet of the Last Hope. And, based on these power signatures, whatever they're launching is massive. The energy readings suggest ships the size of small moons, powered by technologies we can't even begin to understand.
The complete translation came through an hour later, and its contents sent shockwaves through the council chambers. The unknown civilization hadn't been destroyed.
Instead, they had apparently been preparing for something far more ambitious than simple resistance. The messages spoke of awakening the sleeping giants and calling forth the warriors who walk among the stars. But it was the final line of the transmission that caused the most concern among the Council's leadership. The children of Earth send their regards to the void. Let all who hear this know that humanity does not die quietly.
Earth.
The name meant nothing to any of the assembled representatives, but the implications were clear.
This wasn't just another unknown civilization.
This was a species that had apparently been underestimated by their attackers, and now something was coming in response to their distress calls. How long until these ships reached the outer monitoring posts? Asked Council Leader Prime Korthak.
Chief Science Advisor Telran performed rapid calculations on his quantum processors.
Based on the energy signatures and projected velocities, if they maintain current headings toward Galactic Center, approximately 18 standard days.
And what do we know about their intentions? Nothing definitive, Honored Prime.
But, based on the transmission patterns and the aggressive nature of their responses to these devourers, I would recommend we prepare for the possibility that they may not distinguish between hostile entities and neutral observers.
The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, humanity had apparently been pushed to the brink of extinction.
And their response wasn't surrender or evacuation.
Their response was to send what appeared to be the largest military fleet in galactic history straight toward the civilized sectors of the galaxy. Begin immediate evacuation of all Outer Rim colonies, ordered Prime Korthak. And send word to all member worlds.
Whatever's coming, we need to be ready for it.
As the emergency broadcasts went out across Council space, the monitoring stations continued to track the approaching signals. The fleet of unknown ships was moving faster than should have been possible, their energy signatures growing stronger with each passing hour. More disturbing still, the signals were beginning to resolve into individual contacts.
There weren't dozens of ships approaching.
There weren't hundreds. There were thousands. And, according to the latest calculations, they would arrive at the edge of Council space in 16 days, not 18. Whatever humanity had built in response to their persecution, it was moving faster than the laws of physics should have allowed. In the depths of space, the first wave of human vessels continued their relentless approach toward galactic civilization, carrying with them technologies born of desperation and refined by generations of warfare against entities that had forced them to transcend every limitation they had once accepted as unchangeable. Behind them came more ships, and behind those came still more, an armada that represented not just the military might of a single species, but the accumulated fury of an entire civilization that had been pushed beyond the breaking point. The Council had wanted to know what lay beyond the edge of explored space. They were about to find out in ways they had never imagined possible. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the HSV Retribution, her hands clasped behind her back as she studied the tactical display showing the approaching edge of what the locals called civilized space. The term would have been amusing if not for the circumstances that had brought her fleet this far from Earth. After 3 centuries of fighting the Devourers, humanity had learned to view the concept of civilization through a very different lens. Admiral, called Commander Rodriguez from the communications station, were receiving the expected response patterns from the local monitoring networks. Increased activity, emergency broadcasts, fleet movements.
They know we're coming. How many ships are they mobilizing?
Chen asked, not turning from the displays. Initial estimates suggest approximately 12,000 vessels across 43 different star systems. Mixed technology levels, mostly conventional fusion drives and basic quantum tunneling capabilities. Nothing that poses a significant threat to our advanced screening units.
Chen nodded slowly.
The numbers were actually larger than they had expected, but the technology gaps were exactly what their long-range reconnaissance had predicted. These Council species had achieved interstellar flight through relatively peaceful development, expanding slowly and methodically across their local galactic region. They had never been forced to innovate under the pressure of total extinction. Orders from Fleet Command, Admiral, reported the tactical officer.
Continue Approach Protocol 7. No hostile actions unless directly threatened.
We're to treat this as a reconnaissance in force until we have better intelligence on these new players.
Understood.
Signal the escort groups to maintain defensive formations but keep weapons powered down. We're not here to start a war with people who haven't shot at us yet. Through the massive forward viewports of the command deck, the stars ahead showed subtle differences in their spectral signatures, evidence that they were entering a region of space where stellar evolution had followed slightly different patterns than in Earth's local galactic neighborhood. After the long journey from the devastated Outer Rim territories, the sight of stable star systems unmarked by Devourer presence was almost surreal. Admiral, were receiving communication attempts from multiple sources. The translation algorithms are having some success with the basic mathematical frameworks, but the linguistic structures are completely foreign.
Put me through to the Xenolinguistics team.
I want preliminary translation capabilities within 6 hours. The truth was, Chen reflected, they had time to work on communications. The approaching fleet represented only the first wave of what humanity was calling the Great Migration. Behind them, spread across light years of space, came the massive colony ships carrying the remnants of human civilization, the industrial vessels that would establish new infrastructure, and the truly enormous vessels that carried the technologies humanity had developed during their 3-century war for survival. But it was the military component that would arrive first, and Chen knew better than anyone how that appearance might be interpreted by species that had never faced an existential threat. The ships of the human fleet were not beautiful in any conventional sense. They had been designed and redesigned countless times during the war, each iteration focused purely on combat effectiveness and survival. The hulls were thick and angular, built to absorb and deflect energy weapons that could vaporize mountains. The armor incorporated adaptive nanotechnology that could repair battle damage in real time. The engines operated on principles that humanity had discovered only through desperate experimentation when conventional physics proved inadequate against devourer technology. Most telling of all, every single vessel in the fleet carried weapons that had been banned by the galactic community's various peace treaties. Not because humanity was inherently aggressive, but because they had learned the hard way that there were entities in the universe for which conventional morality was a fatal luxury. Contact from the lead reconnaissance group, Admiral, the communications officer reported. They're detecting automated defense platforms throughout this region. Sensor analysis suggests the local powers have established a defensive network, but it's designed primarily for deterrence rather than actual combat. What's your assessment, Commander Wells? Chen asked the fleet's chief strategic analyst. These people have been at peace for a very long time, Admiral. Their military technology is focused on maintaining order and preventing conflicts between member species rather than fighting for survival. Based on what we're seeing, they've probably never encountered anything like the Devourers. Which means they've never encountered anything like us. Exactly. Our smallest escort vessels are carrying more firepower than their largest battlecruisers. And that's before we factor in the technological advantages. Chen turned to study the personnel status boards that lined one wall of the command center. Green indicators showed the status of the fleet's 47,000 ships, ranging from single-person reconnaissance craft to the massive dreadnoughts that served as mobile command centers. Each vessel represented not just military capability, but the accumulated knowledge and desperation of a species that had been forced to transcend its own limitations or face complete annihilation. The crew members visible throughout the command center showed the physical changes that 3 centuries of war had produced in humanity. Extended lifespans, enhanced reflexes, improved resistance to radiation and G-forces. The technologies that had kept them alive against impossible odds had fundamentally altered what it meant to be human. Admiral, we're receiving a coordinated transmission from what appears to be their primary governing body. The translation systems have made enough progress to provide a basic understanding. Let me hear it. The voice that filled the command center carried the formal tones of diplomatic protocol, but underneath Chen could hear the tension that came from facing an unknown threat. To the fleet of unknown origin approaching Council space, this is Prime Coordinator Korthak of the Galactic Council. We seek peaceful contact and wish to understand your intentions. We are prepared to offer diplomatic immunity and safe passage to representatives who wish to engage in formal negotiations. Chen considered the message for several minutes before responding. The diplomatic approach was exactly what they had hoped for, but it also presented certain complications. How do you explain to a peaceful civilization that you're refugees from a war they couldn't possibly understand, carrying weapons they couldn't possibly comprehend, fleeing from enemies that shouldn't exist according to their understanding of the universe? Prepare a response, she said finally. Standard first contact protocols, but modified for our current situation. Admiral, should we mention the Devourers? Not yet. These people have never faced anything like that. If we start talking about entities that consume entire star systems, they'll either think we're insane or decide we're the threat they need to defend against. The message that went out was carefully crafted to provide information while avoiding the more disturbing details of humanity's recent history. It identified them as refugees from a distant region of space, seeking passage through Council territory to establish new settlements in uninhabited systems. It mentioned their willingness to share certain technologies in exchange for navigation rights and diplomatic recognition. What it didn't mention was that the technologies humanity was prepared to share could revolutionize galactic civilization, that the uninhabited systems they were seeking were located in regions these people considered impossibly dangerous to explore, or that the fleet they were looking at represented less than 10% of humanity's current military capability. Response coming in, Admiral. They're expressing cautious welcome and requesting that a small delegation proceed to a neutral meeting point for formal negotiations. They're also asking about our ship classifications. They want to know why we're traveling with what they're interpreting as a full battle fleet. Chen smiled grimly. It was a reasonable question, and one that would be difficult to answer honestly. How do you explain that this wasn't a battle fleet, but a migration convoy that happened to be carrying enough firepower to sterilize a solar system? How do you tell a peaceful civilization that every human ship was a potential warship because they had learned the hard way that anything else was simply a target? Tell them we'll be happy to send a diplomatic team, but explain that our ships serve multiple purposes: exploration, colonization, and defense. Due to the hostile nature of the regions we've traveled through, we've had to integrate military capabilities into all our vessel designs. While the diplomatic exchanges continued, Chen turned her attention to the tactical updates flooding in from the scout ships that had pushed ahead of the main fleet. The picture they painted of this galactic civilization was both reassuring and concerning. The reassuring part was that these people appeared to be genuinely peaceful, with no signs of the aggressive expansionism or xenophobic tendencies that had characterized some of humanity's historical neighbors. Their technology, while advanced in certain areas, showed clear signs of development focused on exploration and commerce rather than warfare. The concerning part was their apparent defenselessness against anything that didn't follow their established rules of engagement. Their ships were beautifully designed and technologically sophisticated, but they were built for a universe where conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise. Against something like the Devourers, they would last approximately as long as Earth's first colonies had lasted when the enemy had initially appeared. Admiral, priority message from Fleet Command, the communications officer announced. The main colony ships are reporting Devourer activity in systems approximately 200 light-years behind our current position. The pursuit appears to be continuing. Chen's expression darkened. They had hoped that the massive distance they had traveled would be enough to discourage pursuit, but the Devourers had proven remarkably persistent in their tracking of human populations. If the enemy was still following them, then this peaceful civilization was about to become collateral damage in a war they knew nothing about. How much time do we have? Based on current pursuit speeds, approximately 8 months before Devourer advance units reach this region of space. 8 months to either find a new home for humanity's survivors or prepare an entire galactic civilization for a type of warfare they couldn't imagine. Chen had faced impossible odds before, but this felt different. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were potentially dragging innocent bystanders into a conflict that had already consumed dozens of star systems. Admiral, incoming transmission from the Council's diplomatic vessel. They're requesting permission to conduct close-range scans of our ships as part of the formal first contact protocols. Chen hesitated. The scans would reveal far more about human technology than they were prepared to share, but refusing would certainly increase suspicions about their intentions. And there was another consideration: if the Devourers were following them, these people deserved to know what was coming. Grant permission for passive scans only, she decided. No active probing of our defensive systems. And prepare a classified brief for our diplomatic team. It's time to start telling these people the truth about what they're facing. The truth, Chen knew, would likely terrify them. Humanity had been fighting the Devourers for 3 centuries, and they still didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. Entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, consuming not just the matter and energy of worlds they encountered but somehow harvesting the fundamental forces that held reality together. Weapons that could ignore conventional shields and armor, turning the target's own atomic structure against itself. Ships that moved through space by manipulating the quantum foundations of existence itself. And, worst of all, an apparent intelligence behind the destruction that seemed to view the consumption of sapient civilizations not as conquest or territory expansion, but as some kind of incomprehensible harvesting operation. Admiral, the Council ships are maintaining their distance, but they're definitely conducting detailed scans. Their sensor technology is more sophisticated than we initially estimated. What are they learning? They've definitely identified our weapon systems, though they probably don't understand what they're looking at. They're also detecting our power generation capabilities, which are. The tactical officer paused, checking his displays, approximately 4,000% higher than their largest ships. And they're going to want to know why we need that much power. Yes, Admiral. And when they find out we need it to fight enemies that shouldn't exist according to their understanding of physics, things are going to get very complicated very quickly. Chen nodded slowly, watching as the dots representing Council ships maintained their careful surveillance of the human fleet. In a few hours, the diplomatic teams would meet, and she would have to begin the delicate process of explaining humanity's situation without causing a panic that could destabilize this entire region of space. But, first, she had to decide how much truth these people were ready to hear, and how much time they would have to prepare for the storm that was following humanity across the galaxy. The neutral station designated for first contact negotiations hung in the void between star systems, an elegant structure of crystalline spires and flowing curves that epitomized council engineering philosophy. Built for diplomatic meetings between species with vastly different environmental requirements, it could accommodate virtually any known form of sapient life in perfect comfort. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped through the airlock of the human diplomatic shuttle, her enhanced senses immediately analyzing the station's atmosphere, gravity, and subtle energy signatures. Behind her came the rest of the carefully chosen first contact team, Commander Torres from Fleet Intelligence, DR. Kim from the Xenobiology Division, and Captain Morrison, whose role was officially listed as security liaison but whose actual function was to assess the combat capabilities of everything they encountered. "Welcome to Nexus Station," said the being that approached them across the vast docking bay. It stood nearly 3 meters tall on 4 legs, its carapace shimmering with patterns of blue and silver that seemed to shift with its emotional state. "I am Ambassador Thekval, representing the Galactic Council in these proceedings." Dr. Vasquez inclined her head in the formal greeting gesture they had decided upon. "Thank you for your hospitality, Ambassador. I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, representing humanity in what we hope will be productive discussions." As they were escorted through the station's corridors, Vasquez couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of a civilization that had known peace for millennia. The decorative elements, the inefficient but beautiful architectural choices, the complete absence of anything that could serve a defensive purpose. These people had built this station without considering that it might ever need to defend itself. The conference chamber was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, with environmental controls that could be adjusted for each participant's species requirements and communication systems that could translate between dozens of different languages in real time. Representatives from 12 different council species were present, their diverse forms creating a visual reminder of the galactic community humanity was seeking to join. "Before we begin formal proceedings," Ambassador Thekval announced, "we must address certain concerns that have arisen from our preliminary observations of your fleet." Council Leader Prime Korthak, his massive form dominating one end of the chamber, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Your ships, Dr. Vasquez, carry weapons that exceed anything in our databases. Your power generation capabilities suggest technology that operates on principles we do not understand. And your fleet movements indicate a level of coordination that implies extensive military experience." Vasquez had anticipated this line of questioning, but the directness still caught her slightly off guard. "Our ships are indeed heavily armed, Prime Korthak. We come from a region of space where such capabilities are unfortunately necessary for survival." "Survival against whom?" asked Ambassador Ethnera, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with curiosity and concern. "Our long-range surveys of the Outer Rim region show no signs of hostile civilizations capable of threatening a fleet of your apparent size and sophistication." This was the moment Vasquez had been dreading. "How do you explain the Devourers to people who have never encountered anything beyond conventional interstellar conflicts? How do you describe enemies that exist partially outside normal reality to species whose understanding of physics is based on peaceful exploration rather than desperate survival?" "That's because," she said carefully, "the entities we've been fighting don't show up on conventional surveys. They exist differently than normal matter and energy." The chamber fell silent. Dr. Telran, the chief science advisor, was the first to speak. "Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting the existence of non-baryonic intelligence? Entities composed of dark matter or exotic energy states?" "Not exactly," Vasquez replied, glancing at Dr. Kim for support. "May I show you something?" With the Council's permission, she activated a holographic display that showed the progression of the war against the Devourers over the past 3 centuries. The images began with Earth's first expanding colonies, thriving worlds scattered across dozens of star systems. Then came the first attacks, entire planets simply emptied. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but drained of something essential that left behind husks of matter that no longer followed normal physical laws. "The entities we call Devourers," Dr. Kim explained as the presentation continued, "don't simply destroy civilizations. They consume them in ways that our science is still struggling to understand. They can manipulate matter at the quantum level, turning a planet's own atomic structure against it. They can move through space by manipulating the underlying fabric of reality itself. And they seem to be driven by some kind of intelligence that views sapient life as a resource to be harvested. The council representatives watched in stunned silence as the presentation showed the gradual retreat of human civilization, the desperate development of new technologies, the transformation of peaceful colony ships into mobile fortresses. The final images showed the current situation: humanity reduced to mobile fleets carrying the remnants of their civilization, fighting a running battle across the galaxy against enemies that shouldn't exist. This is impossible," whispered Representative Yultai from the Merchant Coalition. "The physics involved would violate fundamental laws. Matter cannot be consumed in the manner you're describing without leaving energy signatures that would be detectable across half the galaxy." "That's exactly what we thought," Commander Torres said grimly. "For the first 50 years of the war, our scientists kept insisting that what we were seeing couldn't be happening. That delayed our response considerably and cost us several billion lives." Prime Korthak's massive form shifted uncomfortably. "You are suggesting that your entire civilization has been engaged in warfare against entities that our science says cannot exist, using technologies that our understanding of physics says are impossible." "Not impossible," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "Just beyond what conventional science allows for. When your survival depends on it, you find ways to make the impossible work." She activated another holographic display, this one showing technical specifications for human weapons and defensive systems. The council representatives leaned forward as they saw energy weapons that operated by manipulating the quantum foam underlying spacetime, defensive shields that could phase matter into parallel dimensions, and propulsion systems that moved ships by briefly disconnecting them from the normal flow of causality. "My God," breathed Dr. Telran, his crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "These aren't just weapons. These are applications of theoretical physics that we've barely begun to explore. How did you develop such technologies?" "Necessity," Captain Morrison answered simply. "When conventional physics gets your people killed, you learn to work outside conventional physics." The implications were slowly sinking in around the chamber. Ambassador Thekval was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "If these devourers have been pursuing you across the galaxy, and you've led them in this direction." "They're approximately 8 months behind us," Vasquez confirmed. "Maybe less, depending on how quickly they adapt to our new propulsion techniques." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as controlled panic. Representatives began speaking rapidly in their native languages, their translation systems struggling to keep up with the emotional intensity. Through the chaos, certain phrases became clear: evacuation protocols, defensive preparations, emergency session of the full council. "Dr. Vasquez," Prime Korthak's voice cut through the noise like a blade, "you have brought enemies that can destroy civilization itself directly to our doorstep. What exactly do you expect us to do about this?" "Fight," she replied simply. "Or run. Those are really the only options when dealing with the devourers." "Fight with what?" demanded Ambassador Ethnera. "You've just demonstrated that our most advanced weapons are useless against these entities. Our defensive networks couldn't stop a conventional invasion, let alone enemies that can manipulate reality itself." "That's where we come in," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "Humanity didn't survive 3 centuries of warfare by accident. We know how to fight the devourers. We know how to build the weapons that can hurt them. And we know how to modify other species' technology to operate on the principles necessary for survival." The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. The council was facing a choice between accepting humanity as refugees who came bearing both salvation and destruction, or attempting to face the devourers on their own with technology that was centuries behind what the situation required. "What are you proposing?" asked Council Leader Prime Korthak. "A partnership," Vasquez replied. "Your civilization has resources and manufacturing capabilities that could be adapted to produce the weapons and defenses necessary to fight the devourers. Our civilization has the knowledge and experience necessary to use those weapons effectively. Together, we might be able to not just survive the coming attack, but actually stop the devourers permanently." "And if we refuse?" asked Representative Yultai. Captain Morrison answered that question. "Then, in 8 months, this entire region of space becomes another empty zone on the galactic maps. The devourers don't negotiate, they don't accept surrender, and they don't leave survivors." Dr. Telran was studying the technical specifications displayed on his personal console. "These modification techniques you're showing us, they would fundamentally alter our understanding of physics. The philosophical and scientific implications alone." "Science is great," Commander Torres interrupted. But, it's not much use if everyone who might appreciate it gets consumed by entities from outside normal spacetime.
Right now, we need engineering solutions, not theoretical breakthroughs. Ambassador Thekval's carapace patterns were shifting rapidly, indicating deep thought or stress.
Dr. Vasquez, you must understand our position. You're asking us to completely revolutionize our technology, militarize our entire civilization, and prepare for a war against enemies we cannot even comprehend. The economic, social, and political disruptions alone
will be significantly less disruptive than total extinction, Vasquez pointed out. There's another consideration, Dr. Kim added quietly. The Devourers aren't just following us.
Based on our observations over the past 3 centuries, they appear to be expanding in multiple directions simultaneously.
Your civilization is already in their path. We've just accelerated the timeline slightly.
The weight of that revelation settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The council representatives were beginning to realize that their choice wasn't between peace and war, but between preparation and helplessness. How long would we have to implement these modifications? Asked Prime Korthak. If we start immediately and work around the clock, we might be able to upgrade your core defense networks and modify your largest ships within 6 months, Dr. Vasquez estimated. It won't be enough to guarantee victory, but it should be enough to avoid total annihilation.
And what would you require from us in return?
Safe passage for our civilian populations, assistance in establishing permanent settlements, and recognition of humanity as a full member of the Galactic Council with all the rights and responsibilities that entails.
The negotiations that followed would later be remembered as the most intensive in galactic history. Over the next 18 hours, representatives from 43 worlds hammered out the details of what became known as the Emergency Defense Pact.
Humanity would share their advanced military technologies and provide strategic expertise for the coming war. In return, the Council would provide industrial support, raw materials, and political sanctuary for human refugees. But, even as the agreements were signed and the urgent mobilization orders went out across Council space, everyone involved knew that they were racing against time. 8 months to transform a peaceful civilization into something capable of fighting entities that existed beyond normal understanding. 8 months to prepare for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever. The transformation of Nexus Prime's orbital shipyards had been nothing short of miraculous. Where once elegant vessels designed for exploration and commerce had taken shape, now bristled the angular, predatory forms of warships built according to human specifications. The graceful curves of Council engineering had given way to the brutal efficiency of hulls designed to survive encounters with entities that could rewrite the laws of physics. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the newly christened CSS Defiance, watching as the last of the modified Council vessels took their positions in the massive defensive formation. 6 months of around-the-clock work had produced a fleet that bore little resemblance to anything the galaxy had seen before. Council ships retrofitted with quantum disruptors, human dreadnoughts armed with reality-anchoring weapons, and hybrid vessels that incorporated the best elements of both civilizations' technologies. Final status report, Admiral, called Fleet Coordinator Zexai, one of the few Council officers who had adapted quickly to human tactical doctrine. All defensive platforms are online and operating within acceptable parameters. The quantum interference network is fully deployed across a sphere extending 12 light-years from Nexus Prime. Long-range sensor arrays report no hostile contacts, but we know they're coming, Chen finished. Have our deep space reconnaissance units detected anything? Negative on direct observation, Admiral. However, sensor buoys positioned along the projected approach vectors are reporting gravitational anomalies consistent with the patterns you've described for Devourer movement. The distortions suggest a fleet of unprecedented size. Chen nodded grimly. The past 6 months had been a frantic race between preparation and arrival. Humanity's most experienced engineers had worked alongside Council scientists to adapt alien manufacturing techniques to produce weapons that could function outside normal spacetime. Council logistics networks had been completely reorganized to support a war economy. Most challenging of all, officers from dozens of different species had been trained in tactical doctrines developed during 3 centuries of desperate survival. Admiral, incoming transmission from the human fleet reserves, reported the communications officer. Admiral Patel confirms that the civilian evacuation is complete. All non-essential personnel and refugees have been moved to the fallback positions beyond the galactic rim. Good. How many ships does that leave us for the defense? Total combined fleet strength, 47,000 human vessels, 23,000 upgraded council ships, and approximately 156,000 automated defense platforms.
It's the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history.
The numbers were impressive, but Chen knew they were also misleading.
The Devourers didn't fight according to conventional military doctrine.
They couldn't be defeated through superior numbers or better tactics. The only thing that had ever proven effective against them was the application of technologies that existed at the very edge of theoretical possibility, weapons that could strike at the quantum foundations of reality itself. Admiral, called Dr. Vasquez from her position at the science station, the theoretical physics team has completed their final calibrations on the reality anchor network. If our calculations are correct, we should be able to create a localized zone where normal physical laws are enforced, preventing the Devourers from using their dimensional manipulation capabilities.
And if your calculations are wrong? Then, we've just wasted 6 months building the most expensive collection of target practice in galactic history.
A proximity alarm began chiming throughout the command center. Chen turned to the tactical displays, where new contacts were beginning to appear at the very edge of their sensor range. But these weren't conventional ships appearing through normal space. These were reality distortions, areas where spacetime itself was being twisted into impossible configurations. Contact bearing 274 Mark 31, reported the tactical officer.
Range, uncertain. The sensor returns don't make sense, Admiral.
The contacts appear to be moving faster than light, but they're not using any form of FTL drive we can identify.
And the mass readings are what, Lieutenant? They're showing negative mass, Admiral.
Which should be impossible.
Chen had seen this before. The Devourers didn't follow normal rules of physics because they existed partially outside the framework that defined normal reality.
Their ships weren't built so much as grown from materials that shouldn't exist, powered by forces that violated conservation of energy, and crewed by intelligences that thought in ways no human mind could comprehend. Activate the reality anchor network, she ordered. All ships to battle stations.
Signal the Council fleets to implement Defensive Protocol 7.
Across the vast sphere of space surrounding Nexus Prime, massive installations that had been built according to humanity's most advanced theoretical models suddenly came online. The effect was invisible to normal observation, but sensitive instruments throughout the fleet registered the change immediately.
Spacetime itself had become rigid, locked into configurations that would prevent the Devourers from using their most devastating weapons.
Network activation confirmed, Admiral. Local reality is now stable within a radius of 8 light-years.
And the Devourer contacts? They've slowed down.
Whatever they were using for faster-than-light travel, it's no longer functioning.
They're approaching at sublight speeds now.
For the first time in months, Chen allowed herself a small smile. The Reality Anchor Network was humanity's latest development in anti-devourer technology, based on theories that had cost thousands of scientists their lives to develop.
If it was working as intended, they had just eliminated the enemy's primary tactical advantage.
New contacts appearing throughout the perimeter, the tactical officer reported. Devourer fleet strength appears to be approximately 200,000 vessels, though the classification system is having difficulty categorizing them.
The main display activated, showing the approaching enemy fleet in all its alien horror. The Devourer ships bore no resemblance to anything built by conventional engineering.
Some appeared to be geometric impossibilities, structures that folded in on themselves in ways that hurt to look at directly. Others seemed to be composed of solidified darkness, areas where light simply ceased to exist. A few of the largest vessels appeared to be fragments of consumed planets, entire worlds that had been transformed into mobile weapons of unimaginable destructive power. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast across the fleet communications network. Today we face an enemy that has consumed dozens of civilizations, destroyed hundreds of worlds, and driven humanity itself to the edge of extinction. But today is different.
Today we're not running. Today we're not just trying to survive. Today we stop them here.
The response came from across the fleet in dozens of different languages and communication methods, but the message was universal. This was where the galaxy made its stand.
First wave entering weapons range, reported the tactical officer. Council vessels are requesting permission to engage. Granted.
All ships, open fire. The space around Nexus Prime erupted in violence unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed.
Quantum disruptors fired streams of weaponized probability, turning enemy ships inside out at the subatomic level.
Reality anchors created zones where the Devourer's exotic materials simply ceased to function.
Human dreadnoughts unleashed weapons that struck through parallel dimensions, bypassing conventional defenses entirely. The Devourers responded with their own arsenal of impossible weapons.
Beams that aged matter to dust in seconds, projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and energy discharges that converted normal matter into the same alien substances that composed their ships. Damage report, Chen called as the ship shook under impacts that shouldn't have been possible.
Minor hull damage on decks 7 through 12.
The reality anchors are holding, but some of the Devourer weapons are still penetrating our defenses.
Because they're not entirely dependent on dimensional manipulation, Dr. Vasquez explained from her science station.
Some of their weapons operate on principles we still don't understand. The battle raged for hours across a volume of space that encompassed multiple star systems. Council ships fought alongside human veterans in desperate defensive actions around critical installations. Automated defense platforms engaged enemy vessels in close combat that turned local space into a maze of exotic energy discharges and impossible geometries. But, slowly, inevitably, the sheer numbers began to tell.
For every Devourer vessel destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place.
The enemy had resources that defied conventional understanding, an endless supply of ships and weapons drawn from the consumed remains of dozens of civilizations.
"Admiral, we're losing the outer perimeter," reported Fleet Coordinator HFY.
Council battle groups 7 and 12 have taken severe casualties. Admiral Patel's reserve fleet is moving to cover the withdrawal, but the Devourers are adapting to our weapons faster than projected. Chen studied the tactical display, watching as red indicators showed the steady advance of enemy forces toward the inner defensive lines. They had hurt the Devourers badly, destroyed more of their ships than had ever been eliminated in a single engagement.
But it wasn't going to be enough. Dr. Vasquez, status on the contingency weapon? Still charging, Admiral.
The theoretical energy requirements are staggering.
We need another 47 minutes to reach full capacity. Time until the Devourers break through to Nexus Prime? At current rates of advance, approximately 35 minutes.
Chen closed her eyes for a moment, running through tactical options that all led to the same conclusion.
They were out of time and out of conventional alternatives.
The contingency weapon represented humanity's last, desperate gamble, a device that could theoretically destabilize the quantum foundations of an entire region of space, destroying everything within a sphere of influence that would encompass most of the local star systems.
Including, of course, the combined fleets that were defending them. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Prepare for general retreat. All non-essential vessels are to withdraw to fallback positions immediately. Admiral?
Fleet Coordinator HFY's voice carried confusion and concern.
What about the defense of Nexus Prime?
The defense of Nexus Prime is about to become irrelevant, Chen replied.
Dr. Vasquez, how long do we need to clear the blast radius? Minimum safe distance is 12 light-years, Admiral.
At maximum sublight velocity, even our fastest ships need at least 20 minutes to reach safe range.
Then, we accelerate the timeline. Activate the contingency weapon now. Admiral, the device isn't fully charged.
The effect will be significantly reduced, and there's no guarantee it will be sufficient to stop the entire Devourer fleet.
But it will stop some of them.
And maybe that will be enough to give the survivors a chance to rebuild.
The orders went out across the fleet with brutal efficiency.
Non-essential ships began their desperate flight toward the edge of the blast radius while the remaining vessels formed a final defensive line around the massive weapon that humanity had built as their ultimate expression of destructive capability. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez called from her station, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from multiple Devourer vessels. They appear to be preparing some kind of coordinated attack on the contingency weapon itself.
They know what it is?
They're adapting, learning from our tactics.
The intelligence behind the Devourer fleet is far more sophisticated than we initially realized. Chen nodded grimly. Of course the enemy would try to prevent them from using their ultimate weapon.
The Devourers hadn't survived for eons by being predictable or limited in their strategic thinking.
Signal all ships. Maximum defensive effort around the weapon platform. We hold them off for 15 more minutes, then, we activate the device whether it's ready or not.
The final phase of the battle was unlike anything that had come before. The Devourers threw everything they had at the defensive perimeter, waves of ships that attacked with suicidal determination. Human and Council vessels fought back with equal desperation, knowing that the fate of galactic civilization hung on their ability to buy those crucial minutes. Ships rammed enemy vessels when their weapons failed. Captains detonated their own reactors to take out Devourer formations. Entire battle groups sacrificed themselves to protect the weapon that might save what remained of their civilizations.
Time, Dr. Vasquez called. The contingency weapon is ready for activation.
Shen looked around the command center at the faces of her crew, human and alien alike, united in their determination to stop an enemy that threatened everything they had ever known or loved.
Do it!
The contingency weapon activated with a pulse of energy that was felt across multiple dimensions. Spacetime itself convulsed, reality twisted, and, for one impossible moment, the laws of physics simply ceased to function in a sphere 12 light-years in diameter. When normal space reasserted itself, the Devourer fleet was gone. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but, simply, absent. Erased from existence along with their exotic technologies and their impossible ships. But, the cost had been staggering. More than half the defending fleet had been caught within the blast radius, including Admiral Chen herself. The weapon had worked, but it had consumed everything within its sphere of influence, allies and enemies alike. In the aftermath, as the surviving ships regrouped and began the long process of assessing the damage, a message went out across the galaxy. The Devourers had been stopped, at least for now. The threat that had driven humanity across space and nearly destroyed galactic civilization had been eliminated. But the victory had come at a price that would reshape the galaxy forever. The combined fleet that had made the ultimate sacrifice had saved billions of lives, but the technologies and knowledge that died with them would take generations to recreate. And, somewhere in the depths of space, in regions beyond the reach of any survey, sensors detected faint signals that suggested the Devourers had not been completely eliminated. The enemy had been beaten, perhaps even crippled, but they had not been destroyed. The galaxy was safe, for now. But humanity had learned long ago that safety was always temporary, and the price of survival was eternal vigilance against threats that came from beyond the edges of known reality. The war was over. The greater war was just beginning.